scooch. There we go. Even with no hair, my head is too big.
Gotta round it out here and like a little bit back here.
There you go. I'm sure that everybody's coming in right now, so we'll just wait for a couple minutes. In the meantime, thank you everybody for signing up and coming. But for those that didn't come, hopefully you'll receive the recording. I think that we will start. There's a bit of an echo on someone's microphone. I think it's echoing on the live stream somewhere. Okay. Interesting. Oh, there we go. All right. Excellent. You remember I told you never turn on YouTube when you're doing live stream? That's exactly what I did. So, all right. Well, hopefully everybody's here. Welcome. And this is going to be an exciting episode. So we are here to discuss finding from our newest burnout and work-life balance study, which is newer this year. We did another survey, and we'll talk about some strategies how to improve well-being for veterinary professionals. We have an amazing expert panel. Let me introduce everybody. We have Dr. Melanie Bowden, an ER vet renowned for her TEDx talk on veterinary burnout that went viral. Melanie, please tell us a bit about yourself. I know you recently published a book.
Yeah, hi everybody and welcome. I'm a 2016 grad from WSU and I practice small animal medicine. Originally did GP and then some relief, but now have found the love of my professional life in ER medicine. I went through kind of my own burnout journey in 2019 and through that process became a more vocal advocate for this profession and around being cognizant of the culture that we're creating and how do we make careers more sustainable, which is where the TEDx talk and the book came out of. So thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation today.
Exciting to have you. Alyssa Mages, did I butcher your last name? Oh, that's good. Co-founder and chief visionary officer and empowering veterinary teams. Alyssa has previously participated in one of our webinars, Why Are Veterinarians Unhappy? You're welcome to watch it on YouTube. Alyssa, tell us a bit more about your background, please.
Hi, Ivan, and thank you everyone for coming and spending your Friday afternoon with all of us. You know how valuable your time is. I am a CVT. I've been in the field since 2004. Can't believe it's been that long. And, have one of those traditional yet not traditional paths through, kennel assistant to assistant to tech, and then got credentialed in 2012. My background's originally marine biology, and realized I had a huge passion for those aha moments. And so really focused my latter part of my career on education, training, and development. And then realizing that, aptly for the webinar today about talking about how to have that experience with our work and our life selves, what that was looking like for me. And so did a pivot to launching Empowering Veterinary Teams, which is a company I co-founded to produce training content and programs for predominantly the support teams throughout the industry, and really make sure that everyone has the tools they need to not only survive, but thrive in VetMed. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we have a real Dr. Lauren Catenacci, who is head of people and culture at Galaxy Vets. She's an organizational psychologist and coach. Lauren, tell us more about your professional experience and what brought you to veterinary domain.
Thank you, Ivan. So I am an organizational psychologist by training. I earned my PhD at Columbia University. And I have over a decade of experience working with organizations to develop the capabilities and solutions they need to navigate transformational change. And I've done this work with various sectors and industries, from tech to engineering to media to the military. And my passion is really around leadership and culture. And these two are directly related, so much so that my work has encompassed assessing leaders and their cultures, finding alignment between the two, and developing solutions to help them achieve their organizational goals. Now, I have long been passionate about the intersection of my field, organizational psychology and development, with veterinary medicine. And I could never quite crack that nut until I came across Ivan's research earlier this year. I reached out, told him I wanted to partner to bring organizational psychology to veterinary medicine. And that's how I made my big splash in the veterinary domain.
And we're happy to have you here. So thank you for joining us. We'll still need to determine whether veterinarians are more real doctors than PhD in psychology, but we'll leave it outside of this webinar. So a bit about myself. I'm Zach. I built SmartFlow. Some of you may have used it in the past. And last year, we published a study on burnout that was a part of my thesis for the MBA that I was finishing. And it was very interesting to find out the exact measures of sort of where we're at, not just talk about things sort of as a sporadic events, but actually quantify. So we had about 1,500 respondents last year, and we drew some conclusions, but we wanted to repeat the study this year. So basically this year we surveyed 1,600 people. And we use the same scale as last year. So we use Professional Fulfillment Index that was developed at Stanford University. It's sort of the similar measurement of burnout as, well, not similar, but as adequate as BMI. There's a study that compared the two. And so we use the same one so we can compare the numbers. And then we also wanted to measure work-life balance this year. And the reason for that is because 40% of veterinarians reportedly through AVMA study want to leave our profession. And number one reason that they list is a lack of work-life balance. So we found a survey that actually covered that as well, and we'll talk about the findings there. Just to ask everybody, if you want to ask questions, please use the chat. The questions will be accumulated and passed on to us. We'll try to plug them into the conversation. But I would like to talk about the first findings. So the very interesting thing that we found immediately in this year's study, and I'm going to be jumping back and forth on the screen, but it's going to be all right. Go. So what we found out is that this year there's more burnout than in last year. So the score is out of 4. So there's about 10 questions, and we see that 235 it was last year. The ideal is 0. So just to set the stage here, so ideal is 0. So we're burned out, but last year numbers were lower than this year. So Melanie, can you maybe help us to understand why do you think this is happening in our industry and why this is becoming worse? Is this pandemic or there's something else that's happening?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has just put pressures on a industry and a culture that was already somewhat at a tipping point, and so it's just revealed our weaknesses. The underlying, burnout issue, I feel like has been there with increasing client expectations, increasing client demand, and other stressors on our industry with developing and creating some, good support staff networks. But I think that with, the thousands of new adopted pets in the pandemic, people being home, also having a little bit of extra cash from the government. We certainly saw that bump where I was working, that people were seeking additional care. And I think it just put an industry that was already at 80, 90% capacity up to 110. And we just didn't have a good solution of how we were going to address that increased demand.
Alyssa, do you have anything to add to that from your experience?
I completely agree. I mean, it's always been there, to Melanie's point that the pandemic just exponentially increased it, and it brought it really to the forefront. There was no sweeping it under the rug anymore. There was nothing, we were hiding our faces behind masks, but there was less faces to put that on. And we can't just deal with it anymore. It's something that's become really something we have to address. Otherwise, we're not going to have the team members to provide the care that we need.
Ivan, you're muted.
And I'm muted. Lauren, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit more nuance here because what we're learning about burnout is that it's not just this one uniform sentiment. It looks different for different people. So, for example, some research has suggested that there are actually 3 subtypes of burnout that exists in medical settings. And so that's frenetic burnout. So this is the person who's typically a perfectionist, works really hard in search of the next goal, even when they don't really know what it is. So I kind of liken this to that moving goalpost that we can never quite get to. Then there's those who are the under challenge type of burnout. So this is people who typically feel underappreciated, bored with their job and looking for more learning, and or maybe struggling to find the passion in their work. And then finally, there's what we call neglect burnout, which describes people who feel so worn out that it translates to feelings of incompetence in their abilities to perform their role. And I raise this because I think we've seen all of these already in the veterinary industry. And to the extent that we can understand the nuances and how they manifest a little bit differently, we can more effectively try and tackle this problem.
Excellent. That's a great insight. One of the other reasons that we could pick up from the survey was the caseload and how it's affecting the burnout. So I'm going to show another slide on this. And this was very interesting to see the correlation. And it looks like that those respondents, so there are respondents that have 0 cases per day, and I think those are academics. That's probably people that responded that. And then it looks like the burnout is actually increasing with the caseload and almost plateaus at sort of anything over 30 cases per day. So definitely there's a correlation between the number of cases that veterinarians see per day and the level of burnout. Melanie, you're a practicing emergency veterinarian right now. Can you maybe give us your feedback and opinion on this?
Yeah, we are super busy in the ER setting right now, in part because of overflow from RDVM, primary care demand, that people can't get in to see their primary care when needed. I think as an industry, we need to change a little bit how we think about scheduling and managing our caseload. In the past, it's very much been, oh, my pet has an ear infection, it's shaking its head, I'll call today, I'll get in tomorrow. And that's no longer the case. A lot of places have 2, 3, 4 week waiting lists. Some of the strategies that I've seen out there, I definitely have some friends that are leveraging technology with telemedicine to do like triaging to see if a patient really needs to come in or not. I've also seen people starting to do preventative care like book outs. So, trying to schedule next year's exam in advance, but also telling those people that are looking for vaccines and wellness care, the earliest we can see you is 6 weeks to keep more same day appointments available. But I think we have to start retraining ourselves and looking at other, professional medical industry of how they do this to kind of manage our caseload a little bit more effectively.
That makes sense. And the other factor, actually, Alyssa, maybe you have something to add to that?
I mean, from a support team standpoint, for sure, because sometimes it's not as simple as being really the team's worn out. That's definitely true. I haven't been in clinical practice in a little over a year now, but I was at the onset of the pandemic. And how is this happening, and in what capacity, that they're getting utilized? So utilize your support team in diverse ways. To Melanie's point about telemedicine, CSRs can and should be able to do an initial basic triage over the phone, free up your techs and your doctors a little bit to get that initial intake. And then we as, credentialed, licensed or registered, however, what acronym you have in your state or province or wherever you may be, there's only 4 things that we legally can't do, right? We can't do surgery, we can't prescribe, we can't diagnose, and we can't lend a prognosis. But that gives us the ability to do a lot. And so being able to delegate, from a veterinarian standpoint, you don't have to do it all, and you shouldn't. Let your team, empower your team to do more, set those expectations up there. But you do have to be very cognizant of what that patient to caregiver ratio is. I spend the majority of my career in the ER and ICU, and anything more than 4 cases per nurse, you're going to look at a huge uptick, about 60% in mistakes. And that was a study in 2019 by Dr. Galena Hayes. So making sure that you have that, communication with your management teams about, do we want to turn people away? No. But if you have an effective triage system in place, utilizing those telemedicine portals and things to say, yes, I understand your pet's uncomfortable. It's an ear infection. It can wait, and frees up that spot in the hospital is really important. Is there a way that we can network this, locally and regionally? What is the network there for general practitioners and the specialty centers? Can we have a portal that we share? We've got to start thinking outside of the box and making sure that, we take a systemic approach throughout the industry to ensure that patient care extends to the caregivers as well.
That makes so much sense. And, with my personal experience in the emergency hospital, you can have as many veterinarians as you want, but if there's no ratio of veterinarians to technicians, then you can't really process the cases. So that's very important. I love the angle of telemedicine, because it to me, it feels like our industry just goes about it sort of black and white. Is telemedicine or there's no telemedicine, but doing sort of augmented services where you can teletriage, then decide whether they should come in or not, and where the VCPR allows to then do the certain care or at least advice over the telemedicine tools. I think it's somewhere in the middle, because to me, veterinarians, I implemented a lot of technology in the veterinary domain, and veterinarians are the worst laggards of probably all industries. They don't want to change. And I'm sort of laughing, but a little sadly, that's even if the pandemic didn't make veterinarians to use telemedicine, then what will? So we should really think about that. Another interesting finding that we had in the survey, that was my personal sort of question, because I started digging back into when I burned out and what happened and what was that monotony of what I was doing day to day. And we thought about this concept of goal setting. So we wanted to see if when people change their passion and goals, my personal theory is that younger veterinarians burn out because once you graduate from the vet school, which was a huge extended goal, then you kind of get to this sort of same thing every day. And then I thought that maybe potentially they burn out that way. And there's certainly some correlation in the data that we're seeing. So I'm going to present that. We have a couple of slides on the goal setting. So out of those veterinary professionals, we don't know if this is the whole slide. So 26% of people reported that they do set their goals, and 73% said that they don't. But out of those that do set the goals, it looks like those are less burned out than those that don't set their goals. So I'm hoping that this correlation is something that can suggest us in management to start helping the veterinarians and setting sort of personal and professional goals, something to look up in the future. Lauren, what do you think? Is there an angle like that to sort of the burnout issue in our domain, or across other domains as well, that you maybe have experience with?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think goals are really important, and here's why. Goals serve an important function in motivating us because they direct our energy and they focus our focus toward what we're trying to achieve. So to the extent that you're setting specific, challenging goals, we're more likely to see higher performance in those cases. And this is why SMART goals, which a lot of us are familiar with, are so popular, because they challenge goal setters to identify goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bounded. And so by doing this, we increase our chances of actually achieving our goals in comparison to just kind of saying, I'm going to learn a language or whatever it is. And the one thing to think about too is, like, not all goals have to be performance oriented. You can also adopt learning goals. Those are incredibly effective too. And then just circling back on your earlier point about the survey results, this makes a lot of sense to me from a psychological perspective as well, that people who set goals are more likely or less likely to be burnt out. And I mean, if I had to to think it through, like my hunch is that in setting goals, particularly if I'm thinking about veterinarians and vet techs, like it forces you to think beyond the day-to-day, to see the forest for the trees. So you're not just, giving vaccinations all the time, like you're seeing something bigger than what you're doing in the moment. So I'm personally really excited to dive deeper into this in subsequent research. I think there's a lot to unpack here.
Very interesting. Melanie, Alyssa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you about the young veterinarian burnout as the young veterinarian on the panel here. But I think part of it and I mentor a lot of new grads as well. Part of what I see is that they get very overwhelmed too with the big picture, right? With, oh gosh, how do I get to look like this doctor who's 5, 6, 7 years seasoned? And I think the other really beneficial part to goal setting is it breaks down these bigger spaces where you want to get to into smaller, more incremental achievements. And so you don't get overwhelmed by, how do I go from here day 1 to, there day 7? And I've certainly seen that in my own, practice and life, and find that to be a really helpful tool when I'm overwhelmed, to say, okay, well, what are all the little steps that help me get there? And school does that for you by default, because you have a course curriculum, you have tests that you have to take along the way. They ramp it up each year. I mean, I remember being a first year student thinking my caseload was crazy, and fall of the second year, I had 5 more classes than I had my first year, right? Like, and that became the new normal. So, I think goal setting helps also in that component of like making it more digestible chunks on your journey. I have found in private practice that it's very hit or miss. Some of the practices I've worked at are very intentional and do like IDPs, like individual development plans, where you're sitting down and it's more structured and there's follow-up. Most practices are like, great, you're passionate about that, sign up for CE. So I definitely think it's somewhere that we could improve as a industry in general. And I definitely think it's something that especially young veterinarians are looking for, with how much focus there is on like mentorship. And I think a lot of that mentorship is, helping them with this goal setting and helping them achieve these smaller, more digestible kind of pathways.
I think you're spot on with the whole kind of setting. The mentor is not only to advise when you don't know something, but really to structure that journey and where you want to be. So that's an excellent example. And Alyssa, do you see this in practice, the goal setting?
Yeah, to Melanie's point, some places have that in place and others don't. I mean, I actually almost verbatim, like, you love that? Great. There's a workshop, go to Western or go
There's
to
$500 a year.
Exactly. Right. But it's to Lauren's point, I love SMART goals, but I add on making them smarter, because you have to be able to recognize when the situation's going to change. So they need to evolve, and then you need to readjust based upon what you're presented with. So kind of like we live in a PRN, as needed. We have to be able to make sure that we can flex around that. And, as a vet tech, it's, to Melanie's point about as a new grad, you come out as a green tech or nurse, depending on what setting you're in. And if you came straight out of school and you have no clinical experience, oh my God. And the traditional setting too is, oh yeah, we training, here you go, figure it out as you go. And you're in a sea of 200 new people and barking and meowing all around you. And you literally stand there like this, and it doesn't work. So the other R that I like to do with, the relatable, I also do recordable. You have to write stuff down. You have to have some place that you refer back to have that accountability factor. So you're evaluating the situation, where you're at, where you started from, and where you want to get to, because as a tech, we're out there beating our bodies up, right? And you get to my age, 40 and proud, but my knees are not what they used to be, right? So how can we make this a sustainable profession, and what does that look like? It's more incentive than a food reward, though, mind you, I will never turn down free food. None of us will. We're all Labradors in that regard, right? Feed us, we will come. But especially having goals in place that are long-term and they're career-oriented benefits, that's invaluable. That's
so great. And especially that extension, where do you go after that? So much we see with the technicians that, they, after 5 years, they're trying to find something else because it's, there's a ceiling, and extending that career, especially in the larger organizations, you can really do that and structure it just like you do with your current venture, which is great. That's what you do for practices. So thank you for doing that. But it's a great segue into the next finding that is related to the occupation in the hospital. So we also asked the respondents to show where they are in the hospital. What do they do? And not a surprise, just like last year, the assistants and technicians are burned out more than veterinarians. And the interesting part was that we had this section other that we couldn't attribute to anything specific, but a lot of them, I think, were CSRs, and a lot of them were receptionists. And if you'll think about the pandemic and what's happening now, we suspect that that's a large chunk there that were most burned out. But knowing this, at least, well, I suspected this for a long time. Here's the quantitative proof of that. Alyssa, are we doing anything practical to help technicians to burn out less?
Short answer, not yet. Are we working towards it? Absolutely. I think that it comes back to an earlier point, and I believe it was Melanie that made it, that we are an industry of givers and doers. And we will do anything and everything that we can for our patients and their families all the time. And sometimes this comes back to bite us, literally. So it's really making sure that doctors aren't doing everything, like all the procedures, and limiting your technicians to just simple tasks and things. To Lauren's point of those 3 different phases of burnout, a lot of us in veterinary medicine are type A. I have a lot of A's in my name, and I live up to that, unfortunately. And it's something I work with daily. But also, if you're being underutilized, or you don't have something that you're really passionate about, what do you do? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? So it's setting those expectations for yourself, but for, team-based, and set them high, realistic, but set them high. People will work towards what you expect of them, right? So don't underestimate people, right? And it gives them something to strive for. You've got to start recognizing the strengths and providing the support for them to empower themselves. Like, I can't empower anybody, but I can give you the tools and coach you through the process to empower yourself, and make sure that everyone's needs, not their wants, their needs are met. Really don't just ask people how they're doing, but listen to the response and take that temperature of the room, of the practice, and see what's actually going on. Roll your sleeves up and get dirty.
That's excellent. Lauren, by stepping into this industry, what do you think about those different roles in our veterinary clinics, and how is that reflected in the survey that we collected?
Yeah. So this idea of, doctors not doing all the kind of, not needing to do all the procedures, and technicians really getting utilized, it makes me think about the job characteristics model, which is a framework in psychology that we use to help organizations design jobs that motivate their employees. Now, I won't go into all the nuts and bolts of the model, but I think what is relevant here in this conversation are 2 job characteristics or dimensions, skill variety and autonomy. And skill variety, it's the extent to which the job in question, so let's say it's veterinary technicians, are able to use a variety of different skills that they've acquired through their training, as opposed to just a narrow set. So they're really running the gamut of all the things that they can do. Then there's autonomy, and this refers to the degree to which the job allows the employee to use their discretion in how they actually go about accomplishing their work. Now, according to this model, by building skill variety and autonomy into jobs, employees are more likely to find their work meaningful and to take ownership of it. And all of these lead to outcomes such as increased work motivation, job satisfaction, performance. So there are substantial opportunities to build skill variety and autonomy into vet tech roles in particular. And this is a core element of our philosophy at Galaxy Vets in particular, which is to have everyone working at the top of their license.
Thank you for that, Lauren. And it's interesting. I was on another podcast today, and they were asking about what would it look like to give more autonomy to people at work? And it's just let technicians do their job. So many clinics I've seen where veterinarians are control freaks and basically just trying to control every dose, every medication, every hospital that they go to. And when I was doing my relief work, you can't exist that way. You're stepping into a completely unknown environment. There are people that are comfortable with the particular medications, workflows, and things like that. And trying to control that would be just a complete failure as, as a workflow and as probably as a clinician. You can't know everything that they have there. So I really appreciate you saying that as an outside perspective about our industry. Now, another interesting topic is the burnout and gender. We're now completely we're 90%, I think, we're a female profession, and but the interesting finding is that the burnout is greater in women than in men, at least in the sample that we've collected. And so why is that? Is that because of the gender pay gap? Is that low work-life balance? And how can this be fixed? Alyssa, can you maybe comment on that?
Sure. I think I would definitely agree that as a factor, financial stability is always a concern. And another part of this is that a lot of us as women are caregivers outside of practice, and not just of human children, but some aging parents or other family members that require our care. If you have multiple furry children that require your time or energy, or whatever else is equally important, responsibility is outside of the practice. And unfortunately, especially in my role as a technician, it's a statistically universal low wage. There's places in, the South and Southwest where average pay is, $12 to maybe $15 an hour. That's below, living. And then a lot of vet techs and assistants have to hold multiple jobs just to simply pay rent and to eat, which is, it's not feasible, right? And it's not sustainable. So, I mean, how can we even attempt to fix this? Well, we have SOPs in place for medical practice. So let's get those in place, support-wise throughout the industry, establishing a fixed hour a week. Nobody works over 40 hours. I know, I come from the ER. That is like, are you kidding me? If you're in the OR, you've got to finish your case. Yes, but we can work around that, right? And then what wage structure do we have? Make it commensurate with experience and performance and longevity, incentives for advancement and benefits. Yes, please. And another avenue too is approaching it from a legal standpoint to recognize our profession as a part of the overall healthcare system. We all saw the fallout from Peloton, and not just with the recent Sex in the City. To recognize us as a true medical profession, that's a problem, right? If I was just at the hospital the other week, and my nurse said, he's like, I didn't know that you placed IV catheters in animals. Okay. So we do, just so you know, and yes, we use 22 gauge, and I know that that's a Terumo, and that's my favorite kind. So thanks for using that on me. I appreciate that. But really what it comes down to, bottom line for me, is at the individual practice level, right? You've got to place value on the people that provide the care, or there won't be any care to provide.
Absolutely. Melanie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I find that funny, Alyssa, because I just had a client when I diagnosed their dog with pneumonia that they were like, animals get pneumonia? That's a human disease. Mammals are mammals. So it is. We have a lot of work to do in terms of educating the greater populace that medicine is medicine. But back to the question about the gender component, I 100% agree with Alyssa on a lot of her points. There was a study done by AVMA a long time ago called Not Enough Hours in a Day. I think it was like 2005, 2006, where they looked at this question, and 65.2% of women who leave practice or go to part-time do it because they're taking care of dependents, including parents, children, and other people in their lives. I think there is a lot about the culture of our work and what we think is normal that's really abnormal and unhealthy, where we don't get lunch breaks, we don't leave work on time, there's not a clear stop to the end of your day. And that's really challenging when you're having to pick up kids from school or arrange childcare or whatever it is. I don't have kids, but I struggle picking up my dog from doggy daycare and have had to board him overnight a couple of times because I didn't get out on time. I mean, those are the type of life things that blend in with our work, where our work life is always integrated. It can't be completely columned and separate. And I think those those competing roles in our lives, those different hats that women have to wear, somewhat more so than men, based off of this study that they looked at that and said that only 12.8% of males had the same stressor, is definitely something that contributes to that burnout, because not only are you trying to provide for your family and show up at work and be a good employee, but you're stressed about all the other stuff still happening, in your life for the people that and for your friends and everybody else that you're taking care of. And so I do think that that's a big component.
That makes sense. The other interesting finding that we had is that gender nonconforming respondents, they were only 1% of the participants, but they reported significantly higher burnout rate than females. So, and way more than men, obviously. So, do you think that that's lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And can we affect that in some way, Alyssa?
Yes. Being a white cisgender heterosexual female, I can't speak to that from personal experience. But as an ally, what I can say is that there is absolutely a distinct lack of representation for not only our BIPOC teams members, but the LGBTQIA plus community. Only 2.1% of those in our industry identify as African American. 2.1%. That's very small. And I literally cannot imagine working in a setting where there are very few, if any, people who look like me. And that has got to be both mentally and emotionally draining, on top of everything else that we go through on a day-to-day basis. So relatability and a sense of belonging are critical to our health. Not, I tend to not like to separate mental health and physical health. It's, if this is falling apart, our bodies tend to follow suit, right? So, and it's if that's not available, that relatability, that sense of belonging, then it's a problem in and of itself. But it's, again, our work is not easy. It's one of the few professions that's physically, mentally, and emotionally draining on a daily basis. Talk to me about having to deal with a euthanasia situation on a large, aggressive animal. You are physically, emotionally, and mentally involved in that case, and it takes a lot out of you, right? So. But this lack of diversity is something I am diligently working upon. And there's a lot of us that are, right? To other organizations that are speaking to this more eloquently than I ever can are, Possibilities and Blend and Pride BMC. There's mentorship programs, DEI accreditation programs that are coming into creation, and, the ability to create those safe and inclusive and equitable spaces for all of us. But the other part beyond the definite differences that we see are, the contribution to burnout of fear of failure, right? That psychological safety. And I think Lauren could speak to this much more clearly than I can, but really, that's a universal feeling, right? When you're standing there, it's your practicum and you have to get this catheter in and there's 14 people staring at you, and what if it's a life or death situation? You're doing a code, you can't mess up, right? But there's that balance in that instance too, of you learn most from your mistakes, but in some instances you can't afford to make them. So this is where our training and coaching have got to come in. You have to have that support system in place to ensure that the mistakes don't happen because you have worked on them beforehand. And when they do, you're safe to fail. So that way you can get back up and learn. And that is applicable across all areas of our industry, whether it's DEI, clinical skills, or emotional mental well-being. We have to have a safe space for all of us to learn in and grow from.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. So Lauren, as an organizational psychologist, how can employees foster a culture of that promotes the psychological safety and prevents burnout by design? Are there any practical steps that you're taking at Galaxy Vets?
Yeah, first I'd say too, I think it's an interesting situation around psychological safety in a medical setting. And I just want to acknowledge that because I think it is the case that psychological safety can be applied more readily in some ways where when life is not on the line, that's not part of the actual role. So I think there is this unique opportunity that we have to really see what does psychological safety look like in medical settings. And, I think that's where there's a lot of learning, but in terms of psychological safety writ large, the first thing I'll say is that culture, it always starts at the top. So first and foremost, it's really important that leaders they're not simply just bought in to the value of psychological safety, but they're actually champions of it. And there is a big difference. That means that these leaders are actually modeling things like being able to be vulnerable and acknowledging mistakes, ensuring that every member of your team has an opportunity to end space to voice their opinions and their ideas, and then praising people who speak up, especially when it's risky to their career or their reputation to do so. At Galaxy Vets, we're doing a few things that we're very proud of. First, we're really trying to emphasize that there's no shame in failure, especially when it gives us something to learn or to evolve. Next, our leaders are very honest and open when they've made mistakes. And what I've seen is that it destigmatizes that negative feeling for all staff. So all staff are willing to kind of acknowledge when mistakes are made. And that's a really good feeling. And then lastly, we do have very productive conflict such that we share dissenting opinions and modify our perspectives or agree to disagree, but do so in a way that allows us to effectively move toward a solution, but still the team still remains intact. And I think that that's really important.
That's awesome. The work culture is the second reason why vets want to leave the profession, but the number one reason is the work-life balance. And it was very interesting that we added this survey at the end, in addition to Professional Fulfillment Index, and we found out, surprise, surprise, that men have better work-life balance. They're both not very good, according to the study, but better than women and non-conforming to gender. So let me just show this slide on that. And it's a bit of reverse just because of the slides. I was trying to kind of parse it because it's a different study. So basically, the more balanced it is, the higher the score here, because it was the other way around on the burnout. So essentially, men have a little bit more balanced work life, and then female, and then gender variant and non-conforming. So Alyssa, can you add something to that?
Well, I don't have any good hacks, not much of a hacker. And I was never good at walking the balance beam. I really honestly don't belong on land much. I break easily. But I approach this really kind of from a different angle. Instead of a balance, I look at it as an experience. And I come to each aspect of my life with that type of experiential mindset. So when I'm at work, I'm at work. And when I'm at home, trying to be present in both settings. So sometimes the lines blur, not to refer a very horrible song, but anyway, I digress. I strive not to let those fully merge. So some days I've got to do more work. And then there's other days where I need to be more present at home. So I don't really feel that, doing like that 50-50 or, that approach works for me, because I'm always 100% invested in where I'm at and what I'm doing. So I look at it as an ebb and a flow. Right. And I do my best to be in tune with, that sense of overwhelm when it starts to encroach and remove myself from the situation. But I also say it's an experience because we're a whole person, and you can't take the person out from the professional. You literally cannot spell professional without those PERSON letters. Tried it. And so what we're looking at then is truly the human experience, isn't it?
Melanie, you had an interesting angle to this too. So can you talk a little bit about the work-life balance and what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this just goes to show that there's no right answer to this question. And it also comes back to what's the driver of your burnout, right? When we talk about those 3 different types of burnout, and therefore your solution is going to be different depending on what type of burnout is currently affecting you. And you can be affected by any of the 3 at any point in time, and it can shift and change. And so therefore your solution to burnout and work-life balance needs to shift and change. So I think being adaptable and, understanding that what works for you now at this phase of life may not work later. And you have to do a self-inventory occasionally, to kind of stay on top of that. I like the concept of work-life integration, opposite from Alyssa. So there's a book by Cynthia Fox out there by that title. And for me, work becomes conflictual when my personal life and work life are not symbiotic. And so part of what I did in my kind of burnout struggle was took some time away from work to say, what makes me happy, what makes me stressed, and who do I want to be as like a whole person? And then how do I reintegrate veterinary medicine into my life such that it supports my overall goals of who I want to be as a human, which is a big question to ask yourself. But coming from that mind frame, rather than saying I'm a veterinary professional and how does my life flex with that, restacking that to putting myself at the top was an important step for me. I think the other component too is, what we perceive our own work-life balance is also dependent in the context of the perceived satisfaction that other people around us have with their work-life balance. And being a millennial and being on social media, all you see is the hit list of, oh my God, I did this like awesome transfusion, saved this hit by car. And then the next day I was in Cabo. And it's not realistic. And I think it's easy sometimes to let, comparison be the thief of joy in your own life, and to be looking at what other people are doing and then have a perceived negative impression of where you're at, based off of, what other people are doing in their lives. So that was another big takeaway for me in adjusting my work-life balance, was also my mental mindset of what that measuring stick was, and making it about my own goals and what I wanted to be able to do with my time, and not comparing to what my peers were achieving or doing.
I love that concept about integration, because I was struggling with, how do I measure work? How do I measure life? How do I do, how much of one or another do I do? Where's that gray zone? So it's very interesting, because I think that, again, go back to the goal setting. I went through this training on flow and sort of the state of flow and how to get into it. And the big part of it was setting up sort of this massive transformative goal in your life. And going towards that really helps me, because I have certain goals that I set in my life. And then the work that I do these days is really geared towards that. So it helps me to get up every morning. So I can't say any more that I'm a vet and going through the same issues that the veterinarians are out there on the front lines, but having the goal and the purpose to what you do, I think it really creates that merge of the work and life. And then you're kind of living your dream, if you will, if that's what you're dreaming to achieve. So that's how I kind of take that. From Lauren, from the employer's standpoint, what are some things that practices can do to help their employees achieve a better work-life balance?
Yeah, I think practices need to respect boundaries. That's a huge one, right? When people are off the clock, avoid trying to drag them back in, with an email or a text or whatever it is. If somebody has a day off, avoid asking them to move it. Really try and respect those boundaries. In psychology, we always emphasize how important it is to actually understand the behavior that you're rewarding. So what you don't want to do is promote overworking, because then that's exactly the behavior that you're going to be getting. You're going to be implicitly telling employees that if you overwork, that's what we're looking for. And that's what's successful in this culture. So you really want to think about what behavior is getting rewarded, and you want that to be behaviors that are consistent with work-life balance, not overworking. And then practices and managers in particular need to stay attuned to employees' workloads and their general sentiment. If things are unbalanced, it really is the manager's responsibility to be able to recognize this early and take the steps needed to rectify it. Now, I say all this, but the reality is that each organization is different. So above all, my key recommendation is to ensure that your organization or your practice always has a pulse on work-life balance via a feedback mechanism, so a survey, an informal town hall. Because I think what we just saw here with Melanie and Alyssa is like different, interpretations or different perspectives on work-life balance, work-life integration. What you need to do is be able to listen to your employees to ensure that they're getting what they need, not what you as an organization are willing or wish to provide with regard to work-life balance. So I think that's the key there.
Thank you for that response. And we have a question from Mickey. What can be done in veterinary and veterinary technician schools to prepare graduates to enter practice and not burn out? Who wants to take that one?
Talk about it. You need to, it's that we are having this conversation now because we never did before. And there's a lot, we learn a ton of clinical skills and throughout our, in my experience, for my degree. But there is no conversation about how to handle an emergency shift where you are the only anesthesia nurse on duty and you have over 10 euthanasias that night and you are literally running around without one leg and your head's falling off. How do you balance that, right? So it's making sure that if there isn't a course that is focused simply on that, it's integrated throughout. When you're learning about anesthesia, talk about the stressors that comes with this position. When you're in, your dentistry courses, talk about you're not just focusing on your patient doing this, but what is your response to that? And have maybe instead of a particular gen ed course that's required, have that has that communication and those life skills. We call them soft skills and there's nothing fluffy about them. They're hard, talking with one another and having those de-escalation conversations, they come at you, our clients, and you need to be prepared both mentally and emotionally how to create those boundaries so it doesn't impact you. So I think we need to absolutely, at the very least, integrate it with what we already are teaching. And ideal situation, we create a course and a curriculum that focuses on those skills particularly.
Melanie, Lauren, do you want to add to that question for the new graduates, either from technician or veterinary school?
Yeah, I agree with all that Alyssa said. I think some of the things that I was fortunate that I got into multiple vet schools and got to choose which school I went to. And I picked WSU very intentionally because it did some of those things. So we have a communication class that's 4 semesters long, which is like a lot. We had a clinical skills class, like clinical skills open lab that you could go down and just practice some of these technical skills. But they also did SIPes, which are student initiated preceptorship experiences where you could go out and pick a mentor, pick a clinic, and go and work there for 4 weeks in your senior year as part of your clinical rotation. I think we need to get back a little bit to that apprenticeship model and give people more time, both in nursing side and in doctor side, time outside of a sterilized academic environment where they're seeing real caseload and they're seeing, what this looks like and learning about, management of workflow, essentially. Like that's kind of what we're talking about. And how do you deal with that stress and being able to talk to veterinarians around them in the moment about how does this impact you? How do you deal with this? That's a lot of how I was trained in it. Now that I work in ER, I really see the value of teaching everybody, including GP, the concept of triage. I mentally triage my day from phone calls to actual triage of patients to priorities of what management wants me to do, and understanding that mental mindset of not everything is equally urgent, even though it's a loud client or a loud person or a loud note. The thing I say to myself sometimes is not my circus, not my monkeys, as a reminder. And the other thing I say sometimes is, your delay or your, effective planning does not my emergency make. But being able to then communicate that in a less sassy way to the individual I'm working with, to kind of reset expectations and reset priorities. And again, have those communication skills to be able to get through it, I think is really important.
Lauren, do you have anything to add to the new grads and veterinary topic?
The one thing, it's kind of echoing both what Melanie and Alyssa said, and it's really about boundaries and being able to set them and stick to them. And so I'd love to see more of the vet schools and vet tech schools be able to provide more courses on this, because I do think that that's really important. And I also appreciate that it might be hard to have a boundary at the end of a shift when there's a critical emergency. But just in the service of the bigger burnout prevention, I really would emphasize the setting and maintaining boundaries.
Yeah, makes sense. I recorded a couple of things that I wanted to reflect on, because there's a couple of interesting initiatives out there in the vet schools, and there's one in the UK, and that it would be good to give a shout out to my friend Alan Robinson, who is actually dedicating a lot of his career and time on researching the topic of burnout. He's in Europe. He built a company called Vet Dynamics, and they're building this school where the curriculum will include the training on how to set boundaries. And basically, right now in this market of overwhelming demand of patients, they're basically teaching veterinarians and veterinary students to say no to some cases and just stop saying everything can come in. And I think a huge part of it is how we compensate our vets. A big part of it, if you're on pro-sell, what people call pro-sell, you're motivating the wrong behavior from many, many angles. You're motivating for them to work more because you earn more, because you have all these loans behind you. The other thing is that your productivity is linked directly to your paycheck, so you're stressed out to do that, and there's no need for that. I think that we can easily as an industry shift towards the compensation. We're raising veterinary pay significantly over the last couple of years, way more than anything else grows as vet pay, and it's not working. The burnout is continuing, and we're seeing the numbers in the study. So I think that's a huge part of it. But I love what Alyssa, you said about training people to ask for help, and training management to understand when the help is needed. I was reflecting on how when I started showing the first symptoms to management of my burnout, and I remember this distinctly, this conversation with the manager, and she was talking to me about something about the caseload, and I'm sitting after a 14-hour shift with a stack like this of medical records trying to type them into Cornerstone, and then in the conversation she said something about, I'm sure that you care about the cases that you're taking care of, or animals, or something like that. And I distinctly remember that I basically snapped at her and I said, no, I don't. And then that was taken very negatively, which I understood. But then now that I remember that, maybe that was a symptom that someone should have said, Ivan is not okay, because Ivan was really not okay 2 months later, and nobody noticed that. And they thought that I was just arrogant, or whatever the reason is for it. So recognizing that people need help at some point, and the reason why they snap is not just because they're bad people. So I think that's really important. And I really like, Melanie, what you said about the urgency and triaging. I like how you use that language of triaging your day. It's very sort of medical angle to it, but that's how I do it even right now. I have, we run a large organization. I have overwhelming demand from many angles. It's from marketing, from PR, from operations, from IT, and everybody has their monkey. And then essentially I do have in my head, it's not only urgency, I have this 2x2 on urgent and important. And something could be urgent and not important. Something could be important but not urgent. And you're really trying to do that, but also balance that and have the boundary and say, look, I understand that this seems very urgent and important to you, but I'm dealing with this, which is on the grand scheme of things is more important. So I really like what everybody had to contribute to that. We have another question from Gary. Do you know of any generational differences today? Do different generations suffer from more or less? Or are there some generations that better vocalizing what they are going through? Which is excellent, because we actually did slice the data by generation. I'm going to present it to you here, and I'm going to go over this, but I would love to hear your opinion on this. So basically what we found out is similar to last year. So yellow is 2020. Under 30, and then the over 60. So those are baby boomers sort of retiring. And the burnout, it seems like it's grows as the age decreases. But the interesting thing, if you compare yellow and red, since last year, everything increased, even in the baby boomers. So definitely in the industry, there's more stress. There's definitely more burnout, but it seems like the younger professionals burn out more. And I've seen other studies. I heard people commenting on this, but just sort of opening as a topic, maybe not that this is so convincing, but Lauren, what do you think about generation and dependent in our domain, at least, on burnout?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm thinking in terms of looking at these results, I mean, I think about age, and I realize this might be a little bit opposite to what you were saying, Melanie, earlier, but I do think there is a way in which, with younger folks in the field, I feel like they might be working a lot harder to establish themselves, to prove their value in the profession. And like, not even to mention the debt that goes behind that, right? Like, so you're much willing to go a lot harder to be able to reconcile the debt that you have, while also trying to prove kind of that you belong in this field. I think that takes a lot of mental demand in the early years of one's career. Like I remember those were a lot harder earlier in my career as well, just trying to establish yourself and establish your value. So I think that given the unique time that we're in right now in the pandemic, but also due to, I mean, this social media presence, like you're never really off. I think that could be driving some of those results. And then on the flip side, with the with the older veterinarians, one hypothesis I have that I'd be interested in learning more about, or, through research is, could it be that they're actually preparing for retirement? So maybe they're reducing their workload a little bit more. And so there's not as much burnout, like comparatively speaking, but I mean, even there, it went up. So those are just some raw thoughts that I have. Definitely an opportunity for us to dig deeper too.
Yeah, and if you look at it in terms of from like a clinical standpoint, age is not a condition, but it is a factor, right? So when we're looking at working with a neonate versus a geriatric patient versus someone that's in the middle, those two extremes we tend to pay more attention to. But you also have to look at, going back to your bar graph, there was a significant increase across the board, right? So, if you think of it in terms of like again, to your point, Lauren, of like, we're pushing ourselves, and I'm in that weird, ambiguous, geriatric millennial, I think is the term for my age bracket.
I've also heard Zennial.
I love it. Finally, I found a name
elder
for
millennial.
Me.
Yeah, I've heard all of
So I was like, well, I don't know how I feel about that, but I'm gonna go with like I can relate to the Gen Xers, and my parents are boomers, and I'm an only child, so like I can really relate to it. But I mean, if you look at how much care we have to actually put into a neonate, right? Like if we're doing a C-section and we have to literally resuscitate those pups, and then they're in an incubator and we have to do all of it. It takes a lot more work when you're young and developing. It's a lot more work than when you're seasoned and you've been through it and you can understand and appreciate and know that there's there's light there at the end of that tunnel. Can't see that light yet. Some people's eyes aren't even open. So I think that's how I've been really able to relate to it in that regards. If you take it from, we're so clinically and scientifically minded, put it into that perspective of like, you're in neonate phase, or if, I have two not small, but younger humans, you go through lump, baby, and human, right? So where you can just plunk them down and not worry about it. And then they're starting to get into everything. And now, I can relate to you. It's a similar, developmental phase too.
I wonder too about the concept of disillusionment in this. I certainly went through this as a new grad, that like what I thought being a veterinarian would be. And I spent a lot of time trying to like participate in this industry before I made the decision to spend, $250,000 on student loans to become a veterinarian, to make sure I'd like it and want to do it for like 40 years. And I still went through a disillusionment phase where, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And that kind of fear of failure, right? Of like, because it's not what I thought I was going to be. Am I doing this right? Is like, is this how it's going to be forever? Is it always going to feel this way? And I think that's something that you struggle a lot with too, maybe to the world you're presenting this, like, I want to show my value, I want to show my worth, but a lot of that's from your own imposter syndrome of feeling very deeply that you don't have those things. I wonder if there will be a change in disillusionment at the end, the other generation, if we continue to track it, as people are now selling practices to corporate, because that's looking very different now too, where you used to be able to, sell your practice and transition out and you're done in 6 months. And now a lot of people are getting these contracts of, you have to stay on for 3 years to transfer goodwill. You have to, until you replace yourself with another associate, which is really hard right now in this job market, you have to continue to work full time. And what that transition was and what those opportunities were to end your career and to be able to capture your equity out of your practice is changing. So I think that'll be something interesting to watch too, as this boomer generation really starts to retire and leave, the industry more, as how does that impact their feeling of burnout and kind of the end years of their professional, life, or as they're transitioning their professional life.
It's very interesting. And Lauren, as you were talking about people that are getting closer to retirement and maybe not that stressed out, I wonder if that does feel like a goal, like that's my goal that I'm going towards. And maybe that is another goal setting. I'm about to retire. But Melanie, it's very interesting about consolidation because I spent last 3 years working very closely with different consolidators, and the variety of contracts, how people partner with veterinarians, they're all, and essentially these businesses are required to. It's interesting how it changed, because when VCA started and Benfield started, the only thing we needed is to take over the business, and business produces revenue and the value. And then all of a sudden, the industry realized when you're transitioning the practice and getting rid of the veterinarian, you're not getting the same effectiveness as you bought the practice before. It was, with certain productivity and EBITDA and all the numbers and revenue. And all of a sudden, when you paid the veterinarian who owned the practice, that was sort of the most hardworking person in it. And once you paid that person, they disengage. So there was another model that came in where they, hold back certain equity, just like you said, there's a holdback. And then, but people still in the last 5-6 years, what you're observing is that people, when they still have about 30-40% of their practice, they disengage. They are not anymore interested. So if you're truly acquiring a practice from someone who has the goal to retire, and you're not meeting that goal, then essentially you're having a person that just a drag along for 3 more years, being unplugged and already paid and doing as little as possible, which is also not effective. So this is where it's interesting, not to weave too much galaxy into this, but this is what we looked at, and we said, let's find specific people that want to stay. So this is actually where we're aiming, those 45, 55-year-old people that they want a mini liquidity event, they want a mini achievement, pay off the loans and buy a house, whatever it is, and then take it to the next level with the organization together. And that's a specific type of people. So I think that the consolidation right now, where it is with the multiples and everything that's crazy is happening, they need to be really selective on people that they partner with. The thesis could be different, but the thesis need to match the people that they're partnering with. So, that is just very interesting, big topic that I've been sort of looking at for the last 3 years, and eventually got frustrated because there's very little conversation about what we're talking about here today. So I want to thank you guys for joining me here. This has been a very interesting conversation, and thank you for finding the time. I know everybody's busy. I know, Melanie, you had the overnight shift, so you look way better than me after the overnight shift. So thank you for joining us. Lauren, thank you. Alyssa, thank you for your inputs, and hopefully everybody who was watching this enjoyed this as much as I did.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ivan.
Thank you, Ivan, and thank everyone else for being here. It was great talking with all of you.
Great. Have a great weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.